Have you ever wondered why a man who once looked at you like you were the only light in a dark room can suddenly turn away as if you never existed? Why the silence that follows love feels colder than betrayal itself, not because he stopped caring, but because he cannot bear to feel. Carl Jung would call it the tyranny of the ego, that fragile, armored shell that keeps the soul from drowning in its own depths. When a man misses you but cannot say it, it is not absence that speaks. It is repression. It is the war between his heart and his pride, between his anima, the feminine within him, and the mask he wears to survive the world. He tells himself he's fine. That you were a phase. That men don't ache over what's gone. But deep inside, something trembles, a shadowed longing that he dares not name. Because to admit he misses you would mean facing the part of himself he spent a lifetime running from, vulnerability. Jung wrote that what you resist, persists. And so, the more he denies the longing, the deeper it festers. He buries your memory beneath logic, distraction, other faces. Yet at night, when the mind's defenses fall silent, he finds you again, in dreams that blur the line between memory and desire. You appear not as you were, but as what he fears to lose forever, connection. You see, when a man represses emotion, he doesn't destroy it. He becomes possessed by it. The repressed doesn't disappear, it hides, waiting, shaping his choices in secret. He will scroll past your name but pause too long. He'll laugh with others but feel the hollowness between each word. He'll convince himself he's moved on, yet his silence is not indifference. It's exile. His ego builds a fortress around his heart, a monument to control. It tells him that longing is weakness, that men must conquer grief by pretending it doesn't exist. But the fortress becomes his prison. Inside it, the boy who once loved freely suffocates. And though he wears the mask of indifference, somewhere deep beneath the stone, the boy whispers your name. You might wonder, why doesn't he just say it? Because to say I miss you would require surrender. It would demand that he kneel before the truth, that he still cares, that he still bleeds, that the armor never truly worked. The ego fears nothing more than humiliation. It fears the mirror that love holds up, the one that shows the cracks in its perfect reflection. Jung believed that love is not simply romance, it is alchemy. Two psyches meet, and something divine awakens. But alchemy burns away what is false. It exposes the wounds that pride keeps hidden. When a man falls for a woman who sees through him, who touches not his body, but his soul, she becomes both his salvation and his test. And when that connection shatters, the pain is not just heartbreak. It is an ego death. He misses you, yes, but it is not you alone he misses. It is the version of himself that existed when he was with you, the man who felt safe enough to feel. In your presence, he touched something sacred, his own capacity for tenderness. And when that was lost, he retreated into silence not out of hate, but fear. Because love cracked his armor, and the ego cannot bear to be seen unguarded. Perhaps you felt the same, waiting for a message that never comes, reading meaning in absence, wondering if he's forgotten. But know this, silence has its own frequency. When two souls have touched deeply, distance does not erase the echo. The unconscious remembers what the mind denies. And though he may never say it, his energy betrays him. You can feel it, that faint, magnetic pull of unfinished truth. You were not merely a chapter. You were a mirror. You awakened his anima, the inner feminine Jung spoke of, the part of every man that yearns to connect, to feel, to surrender. But when he projected her onto you and then lost you, he felt that piece of himself torn away. Now, he wanders through the ruins of his own repression, mistaking silence for strength, and yet, somewhere beneath that ego, there's still a boy standing at the edge of his own emotions, terrified to step in. Terrified of being consumed by them. Terrified that if he says he misses you, it will mean he's lost control, but you are learning something far more powerful. That love does not die because he cannot speak it. It transforms. It teaches. It refines your own soul's mirror. You begin to see that his silence was never a verdict on your worth, but a reflection of his inner war, because when a man misses you but his ego won't let him say it, it's not your rejection he's choosing. It's his own unconscious he's avoiding. There is a quiet cruelty in repression, a slow corrosion of what could have been tenderness into something colder, harder, almost metallic. When a man silences his emotions, he doesn't just lose connection to you, he loses connection to himself. Jung called this the dissociation of the psyche, when a man's conscious identity, his ego, becomes separated from the deeper forces that animate his soul. He begins to live half alive, half seeing, performing strength while secretly hollow. You might see him in a photo, laughing with friends, looking untouchable. But if you could see through the mask, you'd notice the eyes, the faint vacancy behind the smile. That's the shadow at work. It is the unseen self, the part that remembers you even when he swears he's forgotten. Every time he suppresses what he feels, he feeds that shadow. The masculine ego was built on centuries of conditioning: don't cry, don't need, don't feel. Men are taught to conquer everything, even their own hearts. But the psyche does not obey social rules. The anima, his inner feminine, keeps knocking at the door, whispering your name, urging him to remember softness. He fights it. He buries it under logic, work, distraction, women he doesn't love. Yet every suppression deepens the fracture. You, meanwhile, stand at the border between understanding and release. Part of you still hopes he'll awaken, that he'll look beyond his pride, step into vulnerability, and speak the truth that lingers behind silence. But part of you knows, awakening cannot be forced. The ego must crumble from within. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." His fate now is the echo of what he's denied. You were not meant to be his cure, you were the catalyst. The encounter between souls that tears open the hidden chamber of the psyche is never gentle. You mirrored back to him his unlived emotions. The tenderness he abandoned long ago. That reflection both seduced and terrified him. To feel deeply meant to risk losing control. To love you meant to confront himself. And so he chose exile, not from you, but from his own inner world. This is the tragedy of repression. He believes silence protects him, when in truth it suffocates him. The stoic walls he builds become his own tomb. He walks through life detached, convincing himself it's peace. But peace without presence is just numbness in disguise. Seneca once said, "He who suffers before it is necessary, suffers more than is necessary." That is what he does, suffers unnecessarily, because the ego refuses to yield, and yet. There is a strange kind of poetry in the space between you. His silence became your initiation. The pain of not being chosen was the doorway to your own awakening. When you stopped waiting for him to speak, you began to hear something far deeper, your own voice returning. You began to see how easily women confuse his repression with rejection, when often, it is fear dressed as indifference. He doesn't hate you. He fears the power you have to unmask him. You represent the archetype of the siren, not in the destructive sense, but in the sacred feminine sense, the voice that calls a man back to his own depths. Your energy forces him to remember what he buried. But unless he is ready to confront his shadow, he cannot approach without trembling. To him, love is a mirror, and mirrors are dangerous things. They do not lie. You may still feel his pull, the invisible thread that hums between two souls who have touched the unconscious together. Jung called this synchronicity, when two inner worlds remain entangled beyond reason. That's why sometimes you dream of him without trying, or sense his sadness even from afar. The psyche transcends logic. Where there was true connection, time and distance cannot fully sever the bond, but here lies the lesson that transforms the pain. The goal is not to make him return, but to make yourself whole. His repression teaches you the cost of shrinking your emotions to be understood. You begin to honor your own depth, your own sensitivity, your own courage to feel. Because repression is not power, expression is. The feminine psyche, when conscious, becomes the container that transmutes pain into wisdom. Let him wrestle with his silence. Let him learn what emptiness feels like when it is chosen out of pride. Do not become the rescuer of a man who fears his own soul. Your love was a mirror, not a bandage. You showed him where he bleeds, but only he can stop the bleeding, and perhaps one day, when the noise of the world quiets, when his armor cracks under the weight of pretending, he will remember you, not as the woman he lost, but as the moment his heart almost woke up. There comes a point in every man's silence when even he begins to feel the weight of what he's denied. The world around him continues as usual, the same streets, the same conversations, the same laughter that no longer reaches his eyes. But something has changed. Beneath the routine beats a strange dissonance, a quiet grief without a name. Jung might have called it the soul's protest, the revolt of the unconscious against the tyranny of the ego. He cannot say he misses you, yet everything in his being aches with the proof of it. He'll tell himself it's just memory, a trick of nostalgia. But the body doesn't lie. His pulse quickens when he hears a song you once loved. His dreams betray him. Replaying the sound of your voice not as memory, but as visitation. That's how the unconscious works. It will speak through any crack it finds, and still, he resists. Because to admit longing is to confront dependence, and dependence feels like weakness. Men raised in the shadow of repression are taught that control is survival. But control and wholeness are not the same thing. The Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Yet what the ego refuses to understand is that the mind includes the heart. To repress feeling is not mastery, it is exile. You might think he's moved on, but the psyche has its own memory, older than words. He carries you like an imprint, an energetic scar that neither time nor distraction can erase. You were not just another story. You were initiation. Through you, he glimpsed the unbearable beauty of intimacy, and that glimpse terrified him. He thought he could control desire, manage love, strategize emotion. But love doesn't bow to logic. It dissolves it. In Jungian terms, you activated his anima, the living symbol of his soul. Every man carries within him this feminine energy, intuitive, emotional, receptive, the bridge between his rational mind and his divine essence. Yet when he's unprepared, the awakening of that energy feels like drowning. You became the mirror that showed him what he lacked. You illuminated both his capacity for love and his fear of it. And faced with that truth, he chose retreat. He may try to fill the void you left with shallow connections, fleeting bodies, muted conversations, nights that end in emptiness. But these are not replacements, they are distractions. For every time he touches someone new, part of him remembers what authenticity felt like. He remembers the way you listened. The way silence between you wasn't empty, but alive. That memory haunts him because it speaks of what he cannot replicate, emotional safety. And yet, his pride, that fragile deity, keeps him from returning. Pride whispers that reaching out would diminish him, that apology means surrender. He doesn't yet understand that surrender is not loss, it's liberation. The ego believes love must be conquered, but the soul knows love is only ever received. Until he learns that, he will remain chained to his own false strength. Meanwhile, your silence matures into something sacred. At first, it was pain, the hollow ache of being unseen, of knowing his feelings but watching him hide behind composure. But gradually, silence becomes your teacher. You stop craving validation from his acknowledgement. You begin to see that your empathy was not weakness, it was sight. You were able to see the truth of him even when he could not. That is the gift and the curse of the awakened feminine, to love from intuition, to see beyond masks. In that realization, your power shifts. You no longer wait for his confession. You stop wondering if he misses you, because you understand that missing is not the same as growth. He may miss you forever and never evolve. The difference lies in who faces the shadow and who flees from it. He avoids his pain, you transform yours. You begin to see that healing is not about closure, it's about expansion. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming whole. For you, that means integrating both tenderness and strength, compassion and boundaries. You stop romanticizing repression as mystery. You see clearly that emotional avoidance is not masculinity, it's fear. You no longer glorify silence, you honor truth, and perhaps, in another time, another cycle, he too will begin his individuation. The soul always returns to what it avoided. When the noise of distraction fades, he'll be left with the echo of what he denied, the image of you, not as possession, but as symbol, the embodiment of feeling he could not claim. That's what love does at its highest function, it reveals the self to itself. So if he still haunts your thoughts, let it be not as a wound, but as a mirror. His repression taught you what kind of love you'll never settle for again. You were not rejected, you were rerouted, from seeking validation in another's silence to discovering sovereignty in your own, and one day, he will understand. Not when he finally says he misses you, but when he realizes that silence was never strength, it was fear disguised as dignity. There will come a night when he finally feels it, not as a passing thought, not as a memory he can brush away, but as a weight pressing down on his chest. It may happen years later, when he's alone in a quiet apartment, long after the world has forgotten your name. He'll sit in the half-dark, scrolling through fragments of his life, and something will stir, that unmistakable ache he spent so long denying. At first, he won't understand it. He'll think it's loneliness. But loneliness is shallow. This will be deeper, older, the kind of longing that carries both guilt and reverence. It's not just that he misses you. It's that he misses the man he was when you were near. Carl Jung would call this a confrontation with the shadow, the moment when everything he's denied returns, demanding integration. The shadow doesn't punish, it exposes. It shows him every instance he chose silence over truth, pride over softness, control over connection. He will see himself not as villain or victim, but as both, a man enslaved by his own armor. For the first time, the silence that once protected him begins to feel unbearable. He realizes that repression is not strength, it's self-abandonment. He spent so long controlling emotion that he no longer knows how to feel without fear. He begins to sense the emptiness behind every avoidance, the futility of pride that cost him love. And you have long since crossed the threshold of that pain. You've learned that waiting is another form of self-denial. The woman you were when he left was soft in ways that hurt her. The woman you've become is still soft, but this time, her softness is power, not permission. You've walked through the fire of silence and emerged luminous. In that transformation lies the essence of Jung's individuation. You integrated your shadow, the part that longed for validation, that sought worth in his recognition. You've reclaimed what you once projected onto him, your own strength, your own wholeness. What you once called heartbreak was initiation. You were never losing him. You were finding yourself. He, too, begins his initiation, only much later, when the illusion of control collapses. You are the archetype of Eros, the force that awakens the sleeping soul. Through you, he glimpsed the divine feminine, the energy that both attracts and terrifies, because it threatens to dissolve his rigid self-concept. To love a woman who sees him truly is to stand naked before his own psyche. Few men are ready for that. His ego convinced him that detachment was dignity, that silence was stoicism. But stoicism was never about suppression, it was about mastery through understanding. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The emotion he avoided is not his enemy. It is his path. The pain he buried is the doorway to the self he was too afraid to meet. You no longer need his words. His absence has already spoken louder than confession ever could. It taught you that love rooted in repression will always wither, but love rooted in truth endures, even if it changes form. You've learned that closure doesn't come from apology, it comes from awareness. Awareness that his silence was never proof of your inadequacy, but a mirror of his fear, and so, you begin to see his repression for what it truly is, not cruelty, but unconsciousness. He did not choose to wound you with intention, he acted from a place of blindness. The ego, when afraid, does not see clearly. It confuses vulnerability with danger, connection with loss of power. But love, real love, is not a transaction of dominance. It's a surrender to mutual seeing. You once longed for him to reach out, to say the words that would soothe the ache. But now, you understand that those words would have changed nothing unless he had faced himself first. A man can only meet you as deeply as he has met his own soul. And he had not yet met his. There's a sacred irony in all of this. By losing him, you've gained the very thing he's still searching for, wholeness. You've learned to dwell in the stillness that once felt unbearable, to find comfort in your own company. You no longer crave his presence to validate your worth. Your silence now is not repression, but peace, and somewhere, beneath his armor, he feels it. He senses the shift, the energetic release of a woman who has finally let him go without resentment. That's when the longing deepens, because the energy that once tethered him is gone. He'll want to reach for you, but he won't know how. The fortress he built to protect his pride has no doors left. If he ever returns, it won't be the man you remember. It will be a man humbled by his own emptiness, stripped of the illusions that once ruled him. But by then, you will have risen too high to need his confession. You'll see that love was never about possession. It was about awakening. For both of you. He misses you, yes. But more than that, he misses the reflection of his own soul that he once glimpsed in your eyes, and until he learns to find it within himself, every woman after you will be a ghost of the lesson he refused to face. In time, his pride becomes a burden he can no longer carry. The weight of pretending, of living behind carefully constructed detachment, begins to suffocate him. The image he's built, calm, composed, unbothered, starts to fracture under the quiet pressure of memory. It's not your absence that haunts him now, but the self he abandoned to keep his ego intact. Jung once wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. That is where he now stands, on the edge of that terror. Because to accept himself, he must accept the love he lost, the tenderness he denied, the fear that controlled him. The journey toward self-awareness always begins with collapse. When the outer persona cracks, the unconscious floods in like water through a broken dam. And suddenly, he's drowning in everything he refused to feel. He starts to see flashes of the moments he buried, your laughter echoing in a quiet room, your voice soft yet certain when you told him you cared. He'll remember how he looked away, deflecting, joking, pretending he didn't need what his soul was starving for. Now, in the silence he chose, he finally understands what it cost him. He didn't protect himself. He exiled himself. You, on the other hand, have learned to dwell in that silence and make it sacred. What was once a wound has become a window. You no longer chase meaning through another person's validation. You've turned inward, not in bitterness, but in revelation. You've realized that love, at its truest, is never about ownership. It is about awakening. And sometimes, awakening happens through loss. Through the lens of Jung's philosophy, what once felt like heartbreak reveals itself as a psychic initiation, a death and rebirth of the self. The version of you that once clung to his approval is gone. In her place stands a woman who has met her shadow, befriended her solitude, and learned to draw power from stillness. You no longer reach for him energetically, you reach for understanding. You see him not as villain, but as mirror. He was the catalyst for your evolution, and that is his purpose in your story. He, too, begins to feel the stirrings of that same process, only now, much later, when your absence has turned into an echo that will not fade. He's haunted not by you as a person, but by the energy you embodied, truth. He's drawn to women who remind him of you, but they all feel slightly hollow, because he's not looking for them. He's looking for the version of himself that once came alive in your presence. That is the curse of repression. It freezes the moment of emotional truth in time. In his dreams, you appear differently now, not as the woman he lost, but as an archetype. Sometimes you speak, sometimes you remain silent, but your presence always carries the same weight, remember. Jung called this the voice of the anima, the inner feminine calling a man back to his own heart. He can ignore it in waking life, but the soul never forgets its teachers, and though you may never know it, he begins to soften. Slowly, imperceptibly. He stops performing. He grows quieter, more reflective. He starts asking himself questions he once avoided. Why did I push her away? Why do I feel emptier now that I'm free? These questions are the beginning of his descent, not into despair, but into consciousness. The descent is the only way to rise whole. Meanwhile, your own path takes on a luminous quality. You've stepped beyond duality, no longer defining yourself through rejection or reunion. You've become the observer of the cycle itself. You see that love and loss are not opposites, but two faces of transformation. You begin to live from presence, not longing. This is individuation in its purest form, the uniting of your inner masculine and feminine, logic and feeling, strength and surrender. And so, while he wrestles with the ghosts of what he suppressed, you embody what he could not yet become. You are the realized form of what he glimpsed but couldn't sustain. In this way, you transcend him, not in superiority, but in understanding. You realize that love's greatest purpose is not comfort, but clarity. It brings the unconscious to light, and light always disrupts before it heals. He may reach out one day, perhaps with trembling words, perhaps only in spirit. But by then, you will have already made peace with the silence. You will meet him not as the woman who once waited, but as the woman who now chooses. And that distinction changes everything. You are no longer seeking completion. You are already whole. This is the paradox of awakening. When you no longer need what once broke you, it finally returns in a different form. Not as romance, not as reconciliation, but as wisdom. His ego may still fight the words, may still cloak regret in pride, but his soul, that quiet, eternal part of him, knows. It whispers your name not as longing, but as lesson. Because what began as emotional repression has become revelation. He misses you, but more than that, he misses the truth of himself that you reflected. And you no longer ache for what was withheld, because you have learned the ultimate freedom, to love without attachment, to remember without pain. One morning, the air will feel different, lighter somehow, as if the weight you've carried for so long has finally dissolved into something vast and quiet. There will be no grand revelation, no letter of apology, no sudden return. Just stillness. Just peace. That's how true healing arrives, not as a thunderclap, but as a soft exhale after years of holding your breath. By now, you understand what he could not, that love is not meant to be caged by ego. Love is a mirror, a sacred flame that reveals who we are beneath the masks we wear. For him, that flame was too bright. It illuminated the cracks in his identity, the wounds he spent a lifetime concealing. He mistook the discomfort of growth for danger and fled into silence, thinking repression would grant him control. But silence did not protect him. It preserved the wound. He will live with that echo, not as punishment, but as reminder. The psyche never forgets what awakens it. Jung taught that every unintegrated emotion waits patiently at the threshold of consciousness, seeking expression through dreams. Impulses, déjà vu. And so, in small, quiet ways, he will keep meeting you in the corridors of his mind, the scent of rain, the sound of laughter, a fleeting image that stirs what he buried. You have become, for him, the symbol of the life he was too afraid to feel, but your story has already shifted. You no longer orbit his silence, you inhabit your own light. The pain that once defined you has become wisdom carved into your bones. You've learned that compassion does not mean waiting. That empathy does not require endurance. That forgiveness does not mean returning. You forgive because it frees you, not because it redeems him. Through this journey, you've encountered the essence of what Jung called the self, the union of all opposites, the reconciliation of shadow and light. You've met the parts of yourself you once rejected, the anger, the longing, the vulnerability. You've invited them home. And in doing so, You've become something rare, a woman whole unto herself. You move differently now. Your presence is calm, but not passive. It carries gravity. It carries truth. The same energy that once pleaded for love now radiates from you without asking. You no longer chase connection, you embody it. You've learned that love cannot be taken from you. Because it was never external. It was always the consciousness through which you see, and if fate should bring him back, if one day, after all his wandering, he appears again with humbled eyes and trembling voice, you will not meet him with resentment. Nor will you meet him with longing. You will meet him with understanding. Because you now know that he was never truly rejecting you. He was rejecting the reflection of his own unlived truth. You were the mirror, and mirrors terrify those who have not yet faced themselves. In that moment, you will feel nothing but quiet compassion, not the kind that binds, but the kind that releases. You will see how everything unfolded as it needed to. His repression taught you freedom. His silence taught you voice. His absence taught you presence. He was never your loss, he was your teacher, and you, the woman he once could not hold, have become the embodiment of everything he was seeking, but could only find within himself. You are proof that heartbreak, when met with consciousness, becomes transmutation. What was once grief is now grace. What was once emptiness is now expansion. You stand now where few ever arrive, in the sacred space between attachment and apathy, between tenderness and power. You are no longer afraid to feel deeply, because you've learned that emotions do not make you weak. They make you real. You've walked through the valley of repression and emerged luminous. He misses you, yes. But his longing is a whisper from the unconscious, calling him toward the work he has not yet done. And though he may never say it, some part of him will always know that you were the threshold, the moment the mask cracked and the soul began to stir. Let that be enough. Let silence be closure. Let understanding be love's final form. You do not need the apology of a man who cannot yet speak his truth. Because you have already spoken yours, through growth, through forgiveness, through becoming, now you live from a place he could not yet reach. You no longer chase what is withheld. You no longer wait for recognition. You no longer need to be seen, because you see yourself, and in that revelation, everything changes. The ache fades. The longing dissolves. What remains is sovereignty. What remains is peace, because the woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.